Hey, good morning and welcome, the few, the proud, the Unity congregation of the day. All right, very good. We're glad you're here. My name is Brent Decker. I'm the music director here, and we've got Carolyn Keeble on drums, John Moody on bass, and the rest of Barb Galati, our song leader today. Actually, Barb, you can come on up. We'll get started in just a minute here. All right, and to begin the service, we have Swing Wide the Doors. So sing along if you can. And we're happy you're here. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Karen Colson, your platform assistant today. Thank you to the music team and Barbara. And thank you to everyone who makes our Sundays here in our sanctuary so special. Everyone on PowerPoint, streaming video, audio, our ushers, and hospitality and script. If there are any visitors here for the first time, we invite you to fill out, here it is. We have a card in the aisle, so we invite you to fill that out and leave it with an usher, and they have a gift for you as a small token of our welcome. We are blessed with your presence today. Thank you for joining us. Now, please join me in our mission statement. As an all-inclusive community, we awaken to spirit, grow into our soul, and build a better world. And our vision statement, create a world of ever-awakening consciousness, abundance, peace, and love for all. And our core values of love, authenticity, stewardship, oneness, and playfulness. Well, today, as our guest speaker, we have a familiar face. Judy Pilot is with us again today. For those of you who don't know Judy, she has been a longtime member here at Unity of Kalamazoo, and before earning her Master of Divinity degree at Unity Seminary program. She was ordained by Unity Worldwide Ministries in June of 2015. Some of us even took a bus trip to be there in person for the ordination. So we're thrilled that in 2021, when Judy moved back to Kalamazoo to be closer to family and friends, that she also has agreed to serve our congregation and help us as a regular guest speaker and facilitator as we determine what's next for our spiritual community. Thank you all for being here today. And now please join Barbara in singing Think About Love.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming out on such a challenging day. Anyways, that is all behind us. We are here now, and that's what matters. The word for today is light. A bird's cheerful song interrupts the quiet of night. The dark sky grows lighter and puffy clouds begin to glow with a beautiful shade of pink. Brilliant rays announce the sun's arrival. The sun peeks over the horizon, flooding the new day with light. Light dissolves the darkness. Light dissolves the darkness in my consciousness in a similar way. At a challenging time, any heart responds to the hopeful thought that this too shall pass. Hope grows into faith as my mind opens to divine wisdom that is always mine to claim. Guided by the dawning light of truth, I see the way forward and follow it with confidence. As surely as each new day brings a sunrise, my faith assures me the light of truth will dissolve the darkness of any obstacle I may face. And from John chapter 1, verse 5, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. The affirmation today is, the light of truth dissolves all darkness. And I'll say that once again and ask you to say it with me the third time through. The light of truth dissolves all darkness. Together, the light of truth dissolves all darkness. And so, as we begin our time now of prayer and meditation, certainly I invite you to be comfortable in your space and to begin to quiet your mind and set aside any thoughts that have nothing to do with this time and this place and this moment and the reason that we are gathered here together. And so as you quiet your mind and relax, it helps us to know that even on cloudy, snowy days, the light does return each and every morning. That light returns without us summoning it. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to do anything in order for it to be present. Rather, it is ours to do, to be present to the light, to be aware of it, to acknowledge it, to bless it and be grateful for it. And to know that, like that beautiful sunlight, there is so much more for us if we simply are present to it. If we acknowledge it, if we claim it, if we bless it, and if we are grateful for it. Peace of mind is ours for the claiming. Enoughness is ours for the claiming. Guidance is ours for the claiming, for our willingness to simply be quiet, quiet enough to hear the small, still voice, and brave enough to follow the words of inspiration that will come to us. Maybe not right in that moment, but they do come. Answers and solutions and ideas and divine inspiration comes to us all the time if we are tuned in to it. We could be sitting at a traffic light. We could be rinsing out some dishes, walking the dog. We could be reading a book. And these ideas and inspiration and guidance pop up for us. And so it's just a question of us being open, being available, being present. Being quiet enough to hear. And courageous enough to follow. It's just that simple if we let it be. And so I invite you now in the next few moments as we go into a time of silence to simply take some of those questions that you're wrestling with, any concerns that you may be wrestling with. And as we move into this time of quiet and silence, simply give those questions over to your inner light, your inner wisdom, and the divine guidance that is always there for us if we claim it. I invite you now to gently bring your attention and focus back to the room, to this place and to this time. And to know that the light surrounds you, the light fills your heart and soul. You are the light. And you can be the light to others. That light pierces the darkness, and the darkness fades. And so it is, and so we let it be. Amen.
Well, good morning. I am going to be doing a request, actually, from Reverend Judy, which seems very appropriate for the times we're in, although I would be remiss to say that in the eternal struggle of Beatles fans, I'm solidly with Team Paul. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us, and the world will live as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A fellowship of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us, and the world will live as one.
Thank you, John. Good morning, dreamers. One of the reasons why I asked for that song is because it speaks about a number of things that are nothing more than constructs. They're just things we made up. Governments, borders, religion. They're all things that have been made up. And so sometimes when they become the things that divide us, it's even more important for us to imagine where would we be without that thought. Who would we be without that story? And so, for me, that kind of sets the stage for what I wanted to talk about today. The title of my talk today is Why Lent? And many of you have heard me characterize the followers of unity as Christmas Christians in a tent full of Easter Christians. And what I mean by that is that by focusing on Christmas and celebrating the birth of the Christ consciousness in us, we put our divine nature first. We put it ahead of our human nature. And we live from that sense of divine oneness. Easter Christians focus on the need to overcome our sinful human nature. Jesus as ransom for all of our wrongdoing. The original sin of Adam. And the emphasis within the Easter Christian system of beliefs tends to be on sacrifice and suffering, and certainly on sin and our separation from God, not our oneness. So what does Lent mean to a bunch of Christmas Christians? How do we approach it and how do we understand it? How do we participate in this foundational concept of traditional Christianity? So I'm going to spend a little bit of time unpacking that this morning, and I promise you I'll have some answers for you at the end, okay? So let's start with some common ground. In some ways, Lent can be very similar to Advent, which we observe during the 4 weeks prior to Christmas. Both seasons are dedicated to prayer and reflection, a time in which we spiritually prepare ourselves to celebrate major events in the Christian faith tradition. They differ in that the season of Advent tends to be more contemplative and spiritual, and Lent tends to emphasize the ideas of surrender and sacrifice, especially the concept of fasting. Fasting in general, or giving up certain food items, or even perhaps abstaining from certain activities. Symbolically, Lent is patterned after the 40 days that Jesus spent fasting in the desert prior to the start of his public ministry. And while the season of Lent is observed by virtually all of the Christian denominations, Lent itself is not anything that Jesus taught about or spoke about. It's one of those constructs that came after the fact. Lent was invented by the early Christian church, and in many ways it's kind of a formalization and an extension of their custom or their practice of fasting before baptism. Now, we have to put this into a little bit of context because baptism didn't really exist before the time of Jesus. If you remember, Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, and John the Baptist continued to baptize people. And as people began to convert from Jewish faith or no faith to Christianity, then baptism became the rite of passage, if you will. But none of that started really until Jesus was here. And then it got real big after he was gone. So it was after Jesus died that the practice of fasting in preparation of baptism really took root among the early Christians. But they didn't invent fasting. Fasting shows up in many ancient cultures, and it predates any formal religion. So historically, abstaining from food was sometimes associated with mourning the dead. It was sometimes used to increase one's susceptibility to dreams and visions. It kind of would invite us into almost a place where we would begin to hallucinate or have delusions about what was real. At times, it was used in preparation for a sacred meal or some sort of feast. And at other times, it was actually viewed as an act of humbling oneself before one of the many gods that existed back among the ancient peoples. The Greek physician Hippocrates, who was often considered to be the father of modern medicine, sometimes prescribed fasting as a treatment for certain forms of illness. So while the origin of fasting cannot be really tied down to any one particular purpose or form, we can say for sure that people have been doing it for a long, long time. And so it was, again, nothing new to the Israelites. It was nothing new to the Christians. Jesus would have been familiar with the practice of fasting because he was an observant Jew. And in the Old Testament, fasting is typically referenced as a way to humble oneself before God and also to become more susceptible to dreams and visions. You go back and you read through the prophets and you'll see some of that showing up in the scriptures. Now, the Old Testament also had another spin to fasting, and that was this whole notion of food or dietary restrictions. Leviticus is filled with all these do's and don'ts, and a lot of that has to do with food and diet. But it can also be food restrictions or dietary restrictions or forbidding certain foods. And what's being emphasized spiritually in that practice is obedience, not humility or not susceptibility, but obedience. And you remember, Adam and Eve were only given one restriction, and it was a food restriction, right? Okay? And they blew it, and they paid the price, right? So that's an example of, again, all of the different flavors in which fasting shows up, if you will. So obedience, visions and dreams, humility, all factored into fasting as a spiritual practice in the Jewish faith, and the early Christians extended that practice by fasting in preparation for baptism, which many of them were stepping into to become followers of Jesus, and fasting on certain days of the week. So as the Christian movement grew and spread to all sorts of different regions and countries, we started to see a lot of variations in beliefs and practices. And as you all know, differences can lead to some disagreements, and disagreements can occasionally lead into some conflict. And by the time we got to the 3rd century, the early church was deeply divided. Now, some of their conflicts were theological in nature, and I'm not going to get into those because, honestly, I don't even understand some of the nuances, but gosh, they were important, and boy, did they argue about it. But a lot of it had to do with practices and protocol, because, again, the movement was spreading all over the Roman Empire, if you will, and it was going into a lot of different places and bumping up against a lot of other traditions. So, after decades of disagreements amongst themselves, and disagreements that were both small and large in nature, the Council of Nicaea was called in 325, and that occurred at the request of the Emperor Constantine, who was ruling Rome at that time. Now, traditionally, the Romans were pagans. They had lots of different gods and all kinds of different rituals that they observed. But Constantine was a convert to Christianity. He was a rather casual convert, but he was a convert to Christianity nonetheless. And it was pretty much under his rule that they formally stopped persecuting the Christians, because you remember, back in the early days, right after the time of Jesus, the Jesus movement grew so quickly and scooped up so many people. He was a real threat to the local authorities. So after he died, but then rose and was seen again by his disciples, he really became a huge threat. And so Christians were persecuted. All of the early disciples were at one time arrested. Many of them were tortured. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in the next couple of weeks. But suffice to say that they had been persecuting Christians for many, many years. And the Romans were after them. And the Romans liked order. So anything that messed with order, anything that went against the grain, was something that immediately got their attention, and that's why the Christians really bugged them. So Constantine said, enough. We have other things to focus on. We're going to leave the Christians alone. But Christians, you have got to stop fighting with each other. And so he asked them to get together, and that's how we came to the Council of Nicaea in 325. Y'all get together and come up with one story and then run with it, okay? Because I'm not putting up with this. So one of the arguments that they were having about practice and protocol had to do with when Easter should be celebrated. Now, in the early days of Christianity, Easter was celebrated in conjunction with Passover. Those two holidays went hand in hand. And if you remember, what we now call the Last Supper, that was actually the gathering of Jesus and his disciples to celebrate the Passover meal. Remember? Okay, so that would have been, calendar-wise, on Thursday evening. He was arrested that night, and the next day, he was put to death. And then on Sunday, he rose from the tomb. So those two holidays in the beginning were always linked together. But as Christianity began to spread all across the Roman Empire and got closer and closer to Rome itself, because Rome was traditionally a pagan empire, they had all sorts of nature ideas and different ideas that all wove into their mythology, and the worship of their gods. So they started practicing a different schedule for celebrating Easter. I have to read this one because I'll never remember it. But they celebrated Easter on the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. So that's the formula that the Romans and the Roman-influenced communities came up with, and those tended to be the Western Christians. That was their schedule for celebrating Easter. Those over in the eastern section around the Middle East and those countries tended to follow that Easter Passover relationship kind of thing. So needless to say, the Western communities won the argument at the Council of Nicaea. So their formula is the formula that's followed for figuring out when Easter occurs. And it really all has to do with when that full moon hits. So again, it's the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the spring equinox. And you can go look at your calendars, and that's exactly the way it plays out this year. So that's how that goes. So that's how they settled that dispute. So there was another thing that was probably not so much in dispute, but it had to do with this period of preparation prior to Easter. Because Most of the folks were fasting, but it was kind of all over the map. Some did it on Wednesdays and Fridays. Some did it for a full day. Some did it for a period of 40 hours. It was just kind of all over the map in terms of what people were doing to spiritually prepare for Easter. So the church seems to have settled on this idea that 40 days is the correct amount of time. Although if you go backwards from Easter Sunday to Ash Wednesday, it's more than 40 days. That's a whole nother kettle of fish. We're not going to talk about that today. But generally speaking, they kind of settled in on 40 days. And if you have paid attention to nothing other than little dribs and drabs throughout the years, you know that the number 40 tends to be very significant in the scriptures, and it shows up in a lot of different ways. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights during the Great Flood. 40 years passed from the time that Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt until they made it to the Promised Land. Jesus spent 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness in preparation to begin his ministry. And it's also thought by many of the early Christians that Jesus was in the tomb for 40 hours. And that's why many of them started fasting for a period of 40 hours. So we know that metaphysically, 40 stands for completeness. It also is kind of synonymous with the term foursquare, which means something that's having a square shape. It's solid in appearance. It's something that is foundational or fundamental. So we landed on 40 days as a period of time for observing Lent. Now, I want to digress for just a moment here and share a little story with you. There was a man whose plane crashed, and he had crashed while he was out over the ocean, and he survived the crash and miraculously made it to this small island where he actually survived for a number of years before somebody finally saw the smoke from his signal fire and he was rescued. So I always think of Tom Cruise, or not Tom Cruise, but Tom Hanks, Castaway, how he worked all those things out, So when this guy finally gets rescued, obviously he's very excited to finally get off the island, but he's also a little nostalgic about it because, it's been his home for the last couple of years. And so he kind of wants to do this little bit of a tour before he leaves the island for the last time. And he invites the rescuers to come with him. So he shows them the hut that he made for himself, and he has a garden. He shares that with them. And he shows them the different tools and things that he uses for hunting and for taking care of his garden. And he says, and before we go, I want to show you my church. So they said, okay. So they walk down this little path away from the beach, and they come into this clearing, and there's a small hut there. But the guy keeps going, and the rescuers are kind of looking at each other. And they said, well, where are we going? He said, oh, that's the church I used to go to. And I wanted to put that in there because as a Unity minister, I constantly am engaged with people who have come to Unity from other faith traditions. Most of you probably fit into that category. I came from the Catholic faith tradition. And for many of us, there's a lot of stuff that's still embedded up there from whatever that faith tradition was, or for whatever we sampled along the way on our spiritual journey. And like for me, I clearly have chosen to be in unity. I have fully embraced unity. But there are things about the season of Lent in the Catholic Church that I kind of still remember, and they're not bad memories. I liked the incense, you know? It was really very cool and very mysterious the way they covered the statues in purple. And then from the time that, from 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Good Friday until Easter morning, they would take the hosts from the main tabernacle on the altar and move them into a small side chapel. And from that point forward, there was a 24-hour vigil, nonstop, where people would come and pray, and the lighting was just all candles. It was filled with lilies. Now I would probably pass out in 2 minutes if I could last that long with the smell of all the plants. But nonetheless, it was really very cool. Lots of ritual and all of this kind of stuff. And so as we come here from those other faith traditions, some of the memories that we have are very fond memories. And some are not. Some can be very painful. And as a unity minister, one of my responsibilities is to hopefully give you some framework and some tools to help you put into perspective and get settled upon the good memories, i.e., well, how do we do things, or why don't we do this, or what do we believe about that? You know, that's all stuff that comes with us. And hopefully also to give you some things that will help you heal from whatever those bad memories might be for you. And so when you deal with something as big as Easter and all of the constructs that are baked into it, that's a lot to unpack. It really is. And I perfectly understand why folks struggle with this time of year and try to figure out, well, what are we doing? How do we do this? Are we going to sing all them Alleluia songs at Easter time? So, where does that leave us today? How should we think about Lent? What, if anything, should we be doing differently during this solemn season of preparation? And I found some answers to those questions in Charles Fillmore's book, Keep a True Lent. But I want to also let you know that the word Lent does not have a metaphysical definition. It doesn't show up in Revealing Word. You won't find it in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. Lent is an old English word that probably came into being around 1600, so clearly several hundred years after we had been practicing the season of Lent. The Greek and Latin words that describe the season of Lent all have to do basically with words that mean 40 or incorporate concepts of 40. So, disappointingly, I went through Fillmore's book, Keep a True Lent, and there are only 3 pages out of over 200 that even refer to Lent by Fillmore. That's not a bad thing, but I'm just saying is that there aren't a lot of ready translations back and forth, okay? So we kind of have to look elsewhere in terms of how we figure this out. And so where I did find it, and I found something that to me was enormously helpful, was in the foreword to the book. And the foreword to the book was written by Georgiana Tree West. She was a Unity minister. She was ordained in 1935, and she founded the Unity Center for Practical Christianity in New York City in 1936. And she wrote the foreword to this book. And I have some of this information captured for you. So ushers, now would be the time. Ushers will pass that out and share that with you. But in the meantime, you can just relax. You don't have to read it with me. You can just relax and let me read it to you. So what she says here, she says, the Christian world is once again observing the Lenten season, the season of prayer and fasting that precedes the joyous festivity of Easter. It is commonly believed that the Lenten period had to do with the events of the 40 days preceding the resurrection. This is an erroneous idea. Lent is a church institution, and there is no authorization for it anywhere in the New Testament. The idea, however, has a sound spiritual basis. Moses, Elijah, and Jesus himself set a precedent for it. Each observed a 40-day period of prayer and fasting as preparation for their spiritual work. Lent, then, is a church institution embodying an exalted idea, the idea of cleansing and disciplining both mind and body toward the end of making them more receptive to the Christ ideas. Like many other religious practices, it is too often observed in letter, but not in spirit. Too many people make a fad out of Lent. It is fashionable to give up some luxuries. And when those luxuries have to do with food and drink, well then, it's all very profitable physically, right? You know, we lose a few pounds if we give up candy during Lent. There's also a psychological value in the mental discipline involved. But such observance has nothing to do with being a Christian. Atheists would get exactly the same benefit. So, to observe Lent according to the Spirit and not just the letter, we must fast from criticism and condemnation and feast on brotherly love. We must fast from false beliefs in sickness and weakness and feast on the truth of God's omnipresent, perfect life. Fast from false beliefs in lack and limitation, and feast on the truth of God's bountiful good. Ideas such as these form an excellent basis for Lenten meditations, that help us establish permanent spiritual values in the heart and mind. One of the most valuable ways of observing the Lenten season is to fast from the belief that men or nations can stand in the way of God's goodwill for man. Imagine no countries. Now is the time to affirm the power of the Christ Spirit indwelling in all men everywhere and influencing their thoughts, words, and actions to work for the good of the whole. We have a vision of spiritual awakening. We affirm that vision of spiritual awakening. We all want to be of some influence in establishing world peace. When we withdraw our attention, interest, and support from the false and the unworthy, this is true fasting. When we give that same attention, interest, and support to the enduring good, we are feasting on the things of spirit. And this is true prayer. When we have truly fasted in the Christ way, we will have increased our ability to respond to God's goodwill. So, I've taken the liberty of extending her thoughts into some affirmations that I wrote for us. And by the way, there's a reference there. You'll see there's an internet website reference to Truth Unity, where you can find all sorts of good stuff, including this foreword to the book. So the affirmations are at the bottom of the page. There's 4 of them. I don't know, maybe you will take these home and, fold this piece of paper in half and just put it on your fridge. Maybe you'll put it on your desk. Maybe you'll put it where you keep your copy of the Daily Word, or wherever you just kind of sit and have some quiet time. But I offer these to you as a way of saying, this is how Christmas Christians deal with Lent. This is how we practice fasting and making sacrifices. So let's take a moment then to just go through these together and affirm these out loud for ourselves, for each other, and for our world. No man or nation can stand in the way of God's goodwill. I affirm peace, comfort, compassion, and support for the people of Ukraine. I affirm the power of the indwelling Christ Spirit that is present in every person on the planet to influence their thoughts, words, and actions to work for the peace and safety of people everywhere. I withdraw my attention, interest, and support from the false and the unworthy. I give my attention, interest, and support to the enduring good. So, I invite you to take that with you, incorporate that however that fits for you into your practice, and hopefully we have a little bit of a better understanding right now what it means to be a Christmas Christian in a tent full of Easter Christians, knowing full well that much of it is simply constructs. And when those get to be way too much, way too divisive, we simply imagine a world without them. God bless you. Have an amazing week.
Good morning. My name is Marcia Bergstaller, and I'm a member of your Board of Trustees. And thank you, Judy, for a very informative lesson on Lent. That was very good. Thanks again. Would you please join with the board affirmation today? Join me, please. Board affirmation: I am guided by divine wisdom in every thought, word, and action. And as the ushers come forward for the offering, we will do our offering blessing. Divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive.
So in keeping with the theme for my music today, we're going to play it by my favorite Beatle. And I was going to play my favorite song, but I was advised that Maxwell's Silver Hammer is not appropriate for church. So instead, this is I Will.
Thank you, John. Sweet Spirit, we receive these offerings in loving gratitude. We thank you for all of our blessings from which now we generously give. We ask for blessings upon the givers and upon these gifts as they move into the world to do more good in our world. Amen. Now we have a few announcements today. Right after service, a prosperity and marketing team is meeting, so please feel free to join us. And Thursday, we are having a life celebration for Suzanne Skipper at 1 p.m. here in the sanctuary. Saturday, we have our HRI walk. Up on the slide, it says at 10 a.m., but we actually request that everyone be there at 9:30 a.m. so that we'll be organized when the walk kicks off. And then Unity and Community is next week on the 20th as well. All right, choir starts Monday, so be here at 6 p.m. And we'll be singing and performing at Easter. Okay, and Karen?
Just real quickly, Beth was going to be here, but she's not feeling well, and I cannot imitate her energy. I apologize. But she wanted me to tell you to look for her between 9:30 or starting at 9:30 next Saturday at Homer Stryker Field. She's going to try to have a Unity sign. Wear your Unity shirts. We're still taking donations online. We've got over $300 so far towards our goal of $500. And we are 9th on the team list of all the teams that have registered. So that's pretty good. And we've got 11 people so far. So please join us. And I just wanted to say we're not having the homebound visit next Sunday. There's a lot of us that won't be able to do that. So we're having our marketing meeting today. We'll decide on what the next date is for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Karen. Okay, and now if you will join me in the prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Yea, God. And the peace song.
me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be, with God as creator, family all are we. Let me walk with my family in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my joyous vow. To take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.